Hey guys, welcome to the first video on my channel. So in this video, I'm going to be giving you guys my top 6 tips in preparing for the upcoming application cycle. So CASPA opens up on April 25th of this year, and I know how overwhelming the weeks leading up to that particular date are for you guys, but for those of you who are applying this year, I want to say congrats. That's a huge accomplishment. It's not easy to get to the point where you're ready to apply and you've got all of your prereqs down, all of your experiences, everything's ready to go, and you just gotta plug it in and wait for your interviews. So congrats on getting to this point. And then for those of you who aren't applying yet, good on you for watching this video, because when it comes time for you to apply, you're gonna be 6 steps ahead and you're gonna save yourself a lot of time and a headache. So I'm gonna place timestamps at the beginning of this video, just in case there's one thing in particular that you guys want to know about. But if you want to watch all 6 tips, then grab a cup of coffee, get comfortable, and keep watching. So tip number 1, plan your timeline. So April 25th. I'm sure this date is haunting you in your sleep, and it's written on your calendar, and it's all over your social media, and you can't get away from it. I totally get it. I remember the anxiety that emerged during this time for me last year. It is stressful, but you don't have to apply the day CASPA opens or the week it opens. You don't even have to apply the month it opens. In fact, I cannot recommend taking your time with CASPA enough. Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree and I'll spend the first 4 sharpening my axe. Something along those lines. So the more you rush through CASPA, the more likely you are to be making mistakes or to be missing information that is critically important. So my advice is to choose a submission date goal, so to speak. And then from there, once you pick an end date, then you can kind of break up CASPA into chunks respectively. So then this way you're not sitting down for 10 hours at a time trying to crank this thing out, because I promise if you do that, you're gonna be making mistakes all over the place. And then you're gonna spend precious time checking your work and making sure you didn't make minor errors because you saw one thing that was off, and then you have to fix that and then also make sure you didn't make any other mistakes. So don't do that. I did that. I don't recommend it. So what do I mean by submission goal? What should you base your submission goal on? Well, that will depend on the schools that you're applying to. They'll take a look at the applications as they roll in. They'll offer interviews throughout and then offer seats as they go. And the later you apply, the harder it is for you to find a seat in that particular program because they've already offered a majority of the spots. You're gonna wanna apply early, and by early I mean June is probably early but within reason, or before then. So other schools, such as the ones I applied to, are on a non-rolling basis. So this means they have a hard deadline, and then after the deadline, then they take a look at all of the applications and then extend interview invitations from then out. And so this is not like the earlier you apply, the better type of situation. It's just after their particular deadline is when they'll take a look at all of the applications. So there's no real rush here. So for example, all of the schools I applied to were on a non-rolling admissions basis, and I submitted late July, early August, and it worked out fine for me. The Applicant's Manual for Physician Assistant Programs is a really great book that kind of summarizes not only the PA program's requirements, but also their deadlines. And they come out with a new book every year. So it's a great tool to use, but I would definitely recommend cross-checking with the PA program's websites just to make sure that the information in the book is up to date. So the last point regarding the timeline. CASPA takes up to 2 weeks to verify your application. So this means if you're applying to a school with November 1st deadline, you don't want to wait to apply August 31st at 11 p.m. because it's going to take CASPA up to 2 weeks to actually verify that all of your information is correct and then send everything off to the PA program you're applying to. So give yourself 2 weeks ahead of time to submit, and then that way CASPA has enough time to verify everything, and then you don't have to worry that your application doesn't go through. So if you want a timeline of how I worked my way through CASPA, I will provide one down below. Keep in mind, I did apply late July, early August, but this timeline can be expanded or condensed to kind of fit your timeline depending on what your guys' submission goal is. On to tip number 2. So tip number 2, get acquainted with CASPA. So you and CASPA are gonna be spending a lot of time together over the next couple months. And I know it can be intimidating. CASPA has a really bad reputation. You're not sure what to expect, but the best thing to do is to just put CASPA into context. So create a login, explore the web page, kind of get a sense of what the next few months are going to be looking like as far as your timeline goes. So this will not only help you plan your application process in the next few months, but it's going to ease a lot of anxiety when it comes to navigating this application portal. CASPA is broken down into 4 primary sections. The first is personal background. So this is probably the easiest section as it's about demographics and allows the schools to know who's applying to their program. The second is academic history. So this is where you're going to input all of your transcripts and your course material. The third is supporting information. So this is where you're going to enter all of your evaluations, your letters of recommendation, your experiences, including shadowing, your achievements, licenses, essay, all of that. You're also going to add whether you have any current memberships in your state PA organizations or with AAPA. Well, I would recommend having a membership to the state that you're planning to work in and the state that you're applying to. However, because I applied to 3 states, for example, I opted to have the AAPA membership instead. So this was important. This was something that I actually spoke on during my interview, so I definitely recommend it, although it's not necessary. The last section is program materials, and this is where you will enter the school you want to apply to, and you'll find their supplemental applications and materials here as well. Each program's requirements vary, so you have to kind of view this section in detail. So keep in mind that each section is important and you want to make sure you're taking your time with each individual one. You don't want to submit with anything incorrect or incomplete. You want to make sure that you have everything on there so that the schools can kind of see what an incredible applicant you are when you do finally hit the submit button. So the third tip is to create a budget. So keep in mind that the application cycle is expensive. Everything kind of comes together and adds up really fast. So you want to plan ahead, make sure that you're not getting overwhelmed, and give yourself one less thing to stress out about when you're applying to PA school. So the first school you apply to is going to be $179, and then every school on top of that is going to be an additional $55. That's just to start. And then a lot of the schools have something called a supplemental application, which ranges from about $30 to $88. Additionally, you're going to want to budget out money for transcripts, for interview suits, for accommodations in the states that you've applied to, and a general idea of the cost of the flights for the places you've applied to as well. This will give you a general sense of how much the application cycle is going to cost you, and it'll give you one less thing to worry about so you can focus on other areas of your application. Tip number 4, asking your letter writers for your letter of recommendation. So if you haven't asked them yet, you're going to want to do that ASAP. I asked my letter writers to write a letter back in January of the year that I applied, and I wanted to give them enough time because number 1, I want them to write a quality letter, a good letter. So I wanted to give them time to kind of reflect on how long they've known me and what kind of applicant I am and all that stuff. I didn't want them to be rushed, so I don't recommend asking them to write a letter the week of or the day before or anything like that. You want to give them advance notice. Also, CASPA makes you write a little blurb to your letter writers when you ask them to submit their letter into the CASPA application portal. This caught me off guard. I didn't know what to put in it initially, but I just kept it simple. So I put, dear so-and-so, this is in reference to my application to PA school as we discussed. Thank you for taking the time to complete this for me. Sincerely, Samantha, or so forth. I thought it was appropriate, it was brief, it was to the point. I don't think this is the opportunity to kind of put in anything particularly creative or add any inside jokes or anything like that. Just keep it concise, brief, to the point. So regarding who to ask for your letter of recommendation, I personally asked a PA that I shadowed, a doctor that I scribed for, a professor of mine, and a nurse practitioner that I volunteered in Mexico with. So you really want to get an array of people. You don't want 3 professors, then 1 doctor or something like that. You want to kind of diversify who's writing the letter of recommendation for you. Someone in the clinical setting that you worked at, someone in the school setting, and then, a wild card, someone you volunteered with or something like that. If you're not applying this cycle, but you have someone in mind that you think would write you a really great letter, then I recommend asking them to write the letter out now, save it on their computer, and then that way when it comes time for you to apply, they can just kind of submit it from there and they don't have to remember all the details of your interactions. They just have it all saved in their computer and they can just submit. Just be sure to keep in touch with them from now until it comes time for you to apply so they kind of have you in mind. Tip number 5 is gathering transcripts. You're going to want to order 2 sets of transcripts, make them both official copies. You're going to want to send one via mail to yourself because you're going to need to input all of your transcripts course by course yourself into CASPA. And yes, it's tedious. It's a long process, but it's not that bad, I promise. I just went to a coffee shop and plugged away. It was pretty seamless, pretty easy work. You could hire people to enter your information for you, but I don't recommend doing that because you don't know if they're doing it correctly, and no one's gonna care about getting it done accurately as much as you, so just sit down and crank it out. So that's copy number 1. Your second copy of official transcripts you're gonna wanna send from the registrar office and then submit it straight into the CASPA application portal. You cannot submit your transcripts into the CASPA application portal yourself. They will not accept it. Don't do that. That's a big mistake. Something that several of my friends who applied the year before me messed up on because they entered all of their transcripts in themselves manually, but they forgot to submit it to the CASPA portal themselves. And this cost them several months of the cycle. So don't do this. Make sure you submit one official copy to yourself so you can enter everything in manually, and then make sure that you send an official copy from your school you attended into the CASPA portal. The 6th and final tip is to gather all of your experiences from your entire pre-PA journey and combine them all into a place that's easy to access and has all of the details you need when it comes time to type them all into CASPA. This will come in handy in particular for those of you who are not applying this cycle because it gives you time to document everything, and I mean everything. So like shadowing, leadership, patient care experience, all of the details, you know, the manager involved or the PA that you shadowed, the location, the time, the date, the duration, all of that stuff. You're gonna need to keep all of it contained in an area that's easy to access because when it comes time to apply, you're gonna need to type in all of those details into CASPA, and it's tedious and time consuming, especially if you don't have it in a place that's readily available. So what I did and what I recommend is kind of keeping one of these guys available. It's huge, but it's really helpful when it comes time to kind of type in all this stuff into CASPA. So I will add a PDF of what I use to kind of document all of my experiences down below because I didn't do it for everything and I wish that I had done it sooner. I kind of got into the habit of documenting things halfway through my journey, and so it would have just saved me a lot of time if I had done it straight from the beginning because like I said, it is something that takes a while when it comes time to enter everything into CASPA. So you're gonna wanna get ahead of it. Another thing that I recommend doing when it comes time to document your experience is to write down sort of memorable experiences that you've had, or write down why that experience is going to make you an incredible PA student and an incredible future colleague and a future provider. The reason for this is that CASPA gives you a space to write a description of what your role entailed or what your experience entailed. I use this space to sort of not only talk about the black and white information, but also what I learned and why that particular exposure or experience was going to make me a great future student, future colleague, and future provider. I'll give you an example. So one of my experiences in undergrad was to go to Mexico with a group of students and provide primary care services to individuals who lacked access to it. In the experience details, I wrote the black and white information of that experience and then also why I felt that particular exposure was going to benefit me as a future PA student, a colleague, and a future provider. So, for example, it says in the experience details, I manage the triage station on clinic days, during which time we see approximately 52 patients every 4 hours. I take vitals, record chief complaints, and document HPIs for the provider. I ensure our equipment is running properly and supervise up to 2 other EMTs, CNAs, MAs to ensure proper flow of clinic. I present cases to the providers as a way of prioritizing higher acuity patients. With this experience, I've learned the importance of providing a community that lacks dependable healthcare with much needed aid and developed my understanding of global health. That description is a mouthful, but it says a lot. So it talks about not only my experience as an MA working in triage, which involves a lot of clinical skills. I also talked about my leadership experience, so managing MAs, EMTs, CNAs, and then I talked about coordinating with the provider and working with them, and then I talked about what I learned from that experience. So it's a lot, but you want to you want to do that. You want to be very deliberate in how you present this information, because so many people put emphasis on the personal statement, but they don't realize that that's a lot of space to talk about not only your experiences, but also what you got from it and what you learned from it and how you're going to implement that information and that experience going forward. Definitely take your time with those descriptions, have people look it over, and make sure you're really getting everything on the page that you want on the page, and you make sure that the schools kind of get to know who you are as an applicant and what you want them to know. They know. So for those of you who are still kind of going through your pre-PA journey and you're not applying this year, definitely write down memorable experiences as you go, sort of as you're working or as you're shadowing or as you're kind of getting these experiences. Just write down certain memorable moments, how you felt, what you learned from them, because that's going to come in handy not only when you write your personal statement, but also when you write your experience details in CASPA or when you're doing your interviews. So there was like quite a few memories and moments that I had written about that came up during my interviews and that I touched upon in my interviews. So it's only going to come in handy. Definitely get in the habit of writing down those moments now, because they'll come up in the future in one way or the other. Okay, there you have it. Those are my top 6 tips for entering into the upcoming CASPA application cycle. I hope it was helpful. Don't worry, you don't have to memorize all of that. I'm gonna write a summary of everything and link it down below so you guys can kind of refer back to it as you're preparing for CASPA to open. So if you did find this helpful and you'd like to follow along for all things pre-PA, feel free to hit the subscribe button, and you're welcome to follow me on Instagram as well and DM me with any questions you might have regarding the upcoming CASPA application cycle or anything else. I'm happy to help in any way that I can. But with that, stay safe, and I will see you in the next video.